Hello everyone. Today I would like to tell you all a little bit more about why we as HKA Bionet think moving online may not be the quick fix you think it is when it comes to training. Now with this talk, I will briefly cover our multiple delivery mode training model. I will briefly talk about how we adapted this model to work during a pandemic and going virtual. I will highlight the continued need for supportive learning environments, some of our lessons learned in this regard, and some suggestions for the way forward. Now let's start with the multiple delivery mode training model. The model is quite complex and would take quite a long time to explain at length here, but what I would like to highlight with this slide and with this image is simply that the model employs various training approaches. We have a face-to-face component, which are physical classrooms situated across Africa where participants meet bi-weekly for anywhere from 2 to 3 months. We have an online learning component, which is an online learning management system we use to track and manage our staff and participants, deliver materials, lecture videos, and so on. And then we have the distance learning component in which classrooms connect to module trainers remotely for live Q&As at the end of every session. Now, traditionally, the model used mostly online tools to ensure maximum accessibility, but we now train more than 1,000 participants annually, and of course, as a result, the demand for more advanced training also started to increase, which eventually led to a slightly adapted model, which you can see here on this slide. Now, without again going into any great depth about the actual model, the main point I would like to highlight here is that we shifted from using mostly online tools with the original model to trainers and developers actually creating containers that contained all the relevant tools, packages, software, their dependencies, which local classrooms then had to pull, manage, and maintain locally on their own, giving them a lot of ownership over how the course was run, access to their systems, and so on. It also meant resources were available post-course, which was very important for us. Now, the face-to-face classrooms were an integral part of the model, but the pandemic hitting in 2020 really impacted this component of the model quite heavily. Nearly all classrooms had to shift online, but due to the large numbers of participants, we simply could not do away with the classrooms entirely, although we were shifting online. We still needed the staff to provide support to their participants. And so as a result, the course truly became a very unique blended learning experience with local staff really becoming incredibly creative to support the participants, but I'll come back to this shortly. What it did, however, demonstrate was that while many other training providers were in the process of cancelling a lot of workshops and courses, the fact that we had already made use of so many training approaches as part of our course model, it really allowed our model to be highly flexible and adaptable during the pandemic, and still allowed our courses to go ahead, which we thought was really great. The one key thing I would really like to stress here, though, is that removing the physical classrooms did also mean we were removing a standardized and controlled learning environment for a lot of our participants. And this was really difficult to deal with. In the past, participants joining a classroom in person meant that the classroom only required, for example, one machine to connect to the online conferencing system and a projector, which typically meant that we really could minimize, resource requirements and data requirements for participants joining the sessions. They just needed to show up there physically, and the classroom staff took care of the rest. The training room also allowed for good internet connectivity, access to machines, and so on. So a very standardized, controlled environment. And with the image on the left, the little map on the left, You can see how nice and cleanly spread out the participants were across Africa. All of the dots here correspond to only a classroom. And what we wanted to illustrate here was that although we had so many participants, having one connection per classroom meant that overall our connections to online systems remained really low, bandwidth remained low, and so data requirements remained low. But shifting online meant an explosion of individual connections, which also of course had the confounding effect of increasing bandwidth, higher data requirements to join live sessions. It just made it very difficult for participants who were in low resource settings, which the model was actually designed for, or who the model was actually designed for. The image on the right, for example, is just a quick snapshot from one of our courses that we ran earlier this year in this blended learning format, where participants had pretty much joined us from all over the country. And you can even see some international participants joining us, but they were very spread out. And one thing we wanted to demonstrate here is we now had this influx of connections and things that we now needed to manage a lot of the time with our live sessions especially. Now, our learning management system really became our saving grace, and this is just a snapshot of our learning management system. And you can see here the kind of tools we made available to participants via the system, the potential to track students. We made lecture videos available. We made available structured forums for queries. We also delivered graded tests, assignments, and we also even provided real-time chatting tools so that participants from anywhere in the world could connect in real time and have a discussion. And the list goes on. We very specifically, what I would like to mention as part of this part of the talk is that although we manage a lot of our participants and staff via these learning management systems and so on, we also gave local staff the autonomy to really manage their participants as they saw fit and as they saw comfortable using tools they felt comfortable with. And so as a result, we really saw many creative solutions coming up across classrooms. So just as a quick example, on the right here, we see a post from social media from one of our classroom PIs showing that they actually went as far as creating WhatsApp groups for direct and ongoing interactions and support between staff and participants. We saw many classrooms create WhatsApp groups, Slack channels, and so on in order to engage with the participants more directly, which was very interesting. We of course saw many creative solutions emerge, and we cannot of course talk to all of them, but I just thought I would highlight a few of the ways we, for example, remained in contact and provided materials when going virtual. So just to highlight a couple of things, many classrooms, in addition to WhatsApp groups, Slack channels, and so on, also went the extra mile of creating independent Zoom rooms where they actually had independent tutorial sessions online for the time that they would have been within a physical classroom together, to still allow the participants to feel that they were part of a classroom. With more advanced courses, we did things slightly differently. We had a slightly lower number of participants on the course, and so the capacity within our platforms allowed us to create individual breakout rooms per classroom, where the staff and participants of that particular classroom were given dedicated time online, managed by us as the core team, to actually interact, and we made sure that they were actually getting the support, because here with the advanced courses, support was of course incredibly vital. We also had many ways of delivering content and making the content and the course materials available. We used the learning management side, GitHub repos, websites, shared drives, all course dependent. Here we can just see a quick snapshot from one of our courses for our structured forums, and you can see here the many queries that are coming in for each and every forum, and on each and every session, many queries being delivered, heavily utilized by all staff and participants. Now again, without going into any specifics, I just thought I would quickly highlight some of the key insights when we compare some of the stats between our face-to-face years and our years going virtual, in inverted commas. Our introductory course, IBT, for example, saw an increase in the number of classrooms when going virtual, as well as an increase in the number of participants. So this was quite interesting. We suspect that this is likely because, one, being a host was originally limited to you having access to a well set up training facility. And then being a participant obviously required you to attend that facility and attend sessions in person. So moving online removed a lot of those requirements for both the classrooms and the participants. Participants could apply then to any classroom that was happy to manage them, and this is why we also saw participants being so widely spread out in the previous couple of slides. But even more interesting was that we saw a decrease in classroom hosts for the advanced training course, our 16S course. But although we saw a decrease in the number of hosts, we still maintained a similar number of participants. So that was very interesting. And we suspect that this is likely for the same reasons mentioned earlier, that removing the requirements of being in a classroom in person meant that participants could apply to join any classroom that was happy managing them. Just a couple of other things to note here was that there was a higher initial dropout rate early on in the course, but we did notice that the retention rate with those who didn't drop out early on was still fairly good and quite similar to previous years actually, so there wasn't a big difference here. Participants also seemed to be more or less just about as satisfied with the course as in previous years based on our surveys, but a slight drop in overall satisfaction was observed, but that was of course anticipated. Now I am running a little bit short on time, so I will not talk to any of our other training formats here, but you are welcome to probe our experiences with hackathons, workshops, and so on during the live Q&A right after this talk. One key thing that I would really like to stress with the last couple of minutes that I've got with this talk is just that there really is no replacement for a physical classroom. Oftentimes, and it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter what structures you put in place, there just is no replacement. Some participants just struggle on their own, they struggle to keep on track, meet submission deadlines, and they really struggle with this online format. They often get frustrated, they get lost because it takes time to get a response when you do have a query. I mean, in the past, whenever you had a query, a TA was there or a system administrator was there present, could help you quickly and you could move on. Now it takes time to get a response, and so when you move through the work, it can become very frustrating, especially when you're a little bit weaker in the tools and skills that you're learning. The more advanced courses, of course, also then became very challenging, again without this access to immediate help. Especially when working through new code, through new examples. It was very, very challenging. And so we just want to stress that honestly, there really is no substitute for a supportive in-person learning environment, and it almost always greatly impacts on the learning experience of the learner when courses are shifted online, especially when you haven't strategized appropriately. Now, there are many lessons learned. Again, in the interest of time, I can't talk to all of them, so I'll just highlight a few things here. The first thing I'd just like to highlight is that simply moving content online is just not enough. It requires strategic thinking around how you present the content and also often complex engagement strategies. Privacy is not as straightforward, and it often becomes incredibly difficult to remain 100% compliant to privacy laws when online. And very importantly, an online environment does not necessarily equal increased access or uptake of your content or course unless you have planned and strategized appropriately. So just to mention a couple of suggestions for how to move forward in the online world. Firstly, I think there's no right or wrong way to do anything in this format, but there are always better or worse strategies that you can employ. You always need to consider the learner experience first and keep that at the forefront of your mind when you do everything else. If you do that, you will typically always deliver a fairly well-received course. Just bear in mind, if you would become frustrated taking a course, the learner definitely will too. And highly important, get feedback from students and take it in stride. Often if you ask students, they will tell you exactly what they need and how you can improve and help them. Oftentimes we just don't take the time to ask, or we take feedback a little bit too harshly. So just keeping that in mind and keeping an open mind will really take you a long way. And then to end off, be creative, be innovative, try different things and see what works. Now, I would just like to say a quick thank you to all the people and organizations who supported these amazing training initiatives, to all of our funders for the financial support. And I would also just like to take a second to note that the model has already gained international interest. And this year we already teamed up with the Wellcome Trust's Wellcome Connecting Science team to deliver the first blended learning next generation sequencing course to over 30 classrooms in Africa for the very, very first time. So it just shows how incredibly flexible these models are when you're using multiple approaches. And more importantly, how using these different approaches as part of your training will almost always lend to greater adaptability and flexibility of your courses, especially in the face of unforeseen circumstances like a pandemic. Thank you, everyone.